So one of my favorite ways to use breathing is first having the awareness that it's the steering wheel into our nervous system. And so every breath that we're conscious of is a fork in the road where we get to decide how we want to feel.
Welcome back to our enlightening series on breathwork with Sachin Patel. Today, we dive into part two. And if you missed our initial discussion, I highly recommend checking out part one for some truly captivating insights. Last time, we explored topics such as the physiologic sigh, methods for relaxation through breathwork, the role of breathing in weight loss, and the differences between nasal and mouth breathing. Sachin, it's great to have you here again to continue our exploration into the power of breath.
Thanks, Ravi. Always a pleasure. Super thrilled and excited. One of my favorite topics to talk about, and I appreciate the opportunity to share it with your community.
Absolutely. We really enjoy having you here. And actually, I really liked how we started off that last podcast with some breath work. So I was thinking we could do the same type of thing this time, but maybe a different type of breathing exercise that could help people in a potentially different scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my favorite ways to use breathing is first having the awareness that it's the steering wheel into our nervous system. And so every breath that we're conscious of is a fork in the road where we get to decide how we want to feel. And we also get to kind of meet our future self in the sense that I can breathe a certain way right now if I want to feel a certain way in the not so distant future. So if I want to feel more focused in 5 minutes, then I can breathe a certain way. If I want to feel more energized, I can breathe a certain way. If I want to feel more alert, I can breathe a certain way, right? If I want to feel calm, I can breathe a certain way. So every breath that I'm conscious of is that fork in the road opportunity to grab the steering wheel of our nervous system and decide how we want to feel. So we can then kind of guide ourselves and optimize our health in the fastest way that I know how, which is through our breath. And so one of the things that I love to do is help people understand how to increase the activation of their parasympathetic nervous system and how to increase tissue oxygenation. And so if we can do both of those things at the same time, we're improving, cognitive function, we're improving digestive function, we're improving sexual health, we're improving resilience, right? Because you're only as resilient as you are intolerant to CO2. So the more intolerant the more tolerant we become to CO2, the more resilient we actually become. And so I want to share a breathing technique that's really simple that people can do. And I encourage people to find different prompts in their life that would remind them to engage in this breathing practice. So one of the things that I engage this breath with, the prompt for me is anytime I come to a red light. So you can make that your prompt, right? And so I drop my son off in the morning and I'll probably encounter, depending on the day, some days they're all green, some days they feel like they're all red. And so that becomes my opportunity to just lean into this breathing technique. For some of you, it might be when you're on a Zoom meeting, right? No one's going to know you're doing this breathing technique. So that's how powerful it is. You can do it anywhere. Now, if you're unsure about this breathing technique, maybe you don't do it while you're driving or operating heavy machinery until you've tried it at home on your own. Just kind of a disclaimer for everyone. But I can tell you that I've done this, while I'm at a stoplight because that's my prompt. So here's how it goes. It's really simple. I just play some soft music to kind of engage our nervous system. And if I could just get a thumbs up, Ravi, that you can hear the music, you might hear some bells.
I hear it.
Perfect. So this technique is really simple. And it's basically where we're going to extend our exhale as long as we can. What happens when we do that, by lengthening the exhale, we are actually activating our parasympathetic nervous system. We're telling our body we're safe. Imagine if you're in fight or flight, the way you would be breathing if you were fighting or running would be very fast, rapid, short, shallow. And so we're going to lengthen our exhale by breathing out through our nose as slow as we can. The other thing that's going to happen is as we exhale slowly, the concentration of CO2 in our lungs is going to keep building and building and building. And as we exhale, our lungs become smaller and smaller. So the concentration starts creeping higher and higher. And so the goal here is to build that tolerance to CO2 at the same time. Rest assured that as you increase concentrations of CO2, you are actually increasing oxygenation to the tissue. So it's something called the Bohr effect, and I believe we may have talked about it last time, but it's very kind of trips you up a little bit because you would think you need to breathe more to get more oxygen to the tissue. And so you're going to be getting plenty of oxygen. The urge to breathe that you're going to have is the level of intolerance you have to CO2. Okay. So we don't have the urge to breathe because we need more oxygen. The urge to breathe is actually from an intolerance to CO2. So we can build up this tolerance, and this allows us to hold our breath longer, and it also allows us to get more oxygen delivery to the tissue. Now, if God forbid you stopped breathing, right? CO2 concentrations would increase, and of course, the more tolerant you are to that CO2, the longer your body can survive without taking another breath. So it actually makes us more resilient to, fatality as well. So it's really simple. And again, don't let that fool you. Let that be something you lean into, the simplicity of it. And you can teach this to your kids. You can teach it to your spouse, whoever needs it. It's a great way to tap into two key components of what breathing can do for us: help us relax and also help us get more oxygen to the tissue. Important components for healing, if you're on a healing journey, is that we want to get more oxygen to our tissues, because that's what allows the healing process to take place, because that's what fuels our mitochondria. So the only place we use oxygen is in the mitochondria. And so if we want to heal, requires energy. And that energy, in order for it to be produced, requires oxygen. So we're going to increase the oxygenation and relax the nervous system, which is two powerful things that we can all do for ourselves. All right, so here's how it goes. We're going to take 2 cleansing breaths. So Ravi, you're going to be my demo. And what we're going to do is we're going to have you take a nice deep breath in through the nose, and you can exhale through the mouth or the nose. Just let it all the way out. If you want to feel more relaxed, you can do an audible exhale like we did last time. Another deep breath in, let it all the way out, get the CO2 all the way out of your lungs, all the way out. And now a nice deep breath in through the nose, and you're going to hold at the top. Keep holding, take as deep of a breath as you can, fill your lungs, sip all the way to the top. And now you're going to gently let a stream of air out of your nose, a continuous stream of air. You're going to let that out through your nose, as little air as you possibly can, and for as long as you can, as slowly as you can. And if you feel called to, you can set a stopwatch or start a stopwatch just to kind of time yourself to create a baseline for you. And then you'd kind of work up over time. And so the longer you can do this, the better. And what you're going to find is that you'll get better and better very quickly, because this is an important adaptation that your body wants you to get better at. So it'll support you very easily. And then the other thing that will happen is that you will start feeling a lot more calm and focused. And because you're so focused on your breath, your thoughts become singular. Your mind isn't scattered. So it centers us as well as we're going through this process. And so that's it. It's a really simple exercise. Time yourself. My longest time so far has been 1:37. I'm sure there's people that can go way longer. And my son and I have a competition, so we have some fun with it in the car. And so it's a great game that you can play with your kids as well. And so, yeah, I think that's a really simple tool for people to do. Now, another way to build up tolerance to CO2 is to kind of do something similar when you're going for a walk. Okay. So as you're walking and more active, right? And I guess you'd want to just make sure you feel comfortable doing it seated. But as you do this walking, you're really going to have CO2 levels rising really, really quickly. And what I do is I'll take a few cleansing breaths like we did. I'll actually plug my nose, and then I will take as many steps as I can. So that's another way to build tolerance to CO2. Yeah. So I hope that helps. Everyone's nice and relaxed now with the music and with the calm, gentle breathing, I hope.
Excellent. Oh, that was great, Sachin. And it's interesting, the explanation of CO2 tolerance and oxygenation, because I clearly remember in medicine, when we studied respiratory physiology in medical school, we learned about the Bohr effect. We learned about oxygenation versus ventilation. And those of you who are physicians and take care of sick patients, the classic example, or physicians or clinical practitioners, the classic example is the patient with COPD, right? Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So these patients, they come in and they are hypercapnic, meaning that their CO2 is high typically, and they don't necessarily have a problem with oxygenation. They can oxygenate, but they're not ventilating. So because they have obstructive lung disease, they can't ventilate or oxygenate well. And then you help them with ventilation through positive pressure, positive
Hmm.
pressure ventilation. So, what we're doing here, given that we're assuming that our lungs are healthy, but we are, in essence, prolonging our breathing. So we're increasing the CO2. And as you mentioned, it's the CO2 that affects the drive for breath.
Hmm.
And as we increase that and we become tolerant to that, we can we can go through various scenarios in life, and we're not going to have that, like, feeling of panic or whatever if we can't breathe or we're holding our breath, or maybe some anxious moment. You're able to tolerate it a little bit better. It's a really powerful breathing technique that can help in so many ways. So thank you for sharing that. That was great.
Yeah, absolutely. And this might help somebody who has asthma, just to kind of
Yes.
stay in the vein of this conversation, is that when people are hyperventilating, right, what ends up happening is they're breathing in a lot of oxygen, but because they're not breathing correctly, they're packing the CO2 down in their lungs. So the CO2 concentration still stays high. And that's what creates that anxiety and that constant urge to breathe. So getting those people, although it's really difficult and challenging at times, getting them to kind of come to their senses, because the anxiety that they're feeling, that urge to breathe, is actually coming from the brainstem. It's not that they're dying, right? It's just the brain is trying to get rid of the CO2 and get more oxygen. And so if we slow down the breath, have full exhales to get rid of that CO2, and then bring nice, deep breaths in, that's one of the fastest ways to get out of an asthma attack, and then also to help with panic attacks as well.
Yeah, yeah, that can certainly help. And there have been studies on this, where they have taken patients with emphysema, with various lung diseases, and put them through these breathing exercises, and they do feel subjectively better. They're able to, maybe walk or tolerate more exertion than they were prior to these types of exercises. So there scientific studies that certainly demonstrate a benefit. Excellent. Well, this was a great start, Sachin, and there's some concept that I think would really benefit people to hear. And it's a concept called autonomic pairing. And we
Mm.
discussed this prior to the podcast. So if you could discuss what this is, and how this can relate to someone's breathing patterns and health.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of disease actually starts not because we're broken, but because we are autonomically mismatched. So I'll kind of walk people through what that means. So we essentially, for we have a spectrum of our nervous system. So one end of the spectrum is rest and digest, and the other end of the spectrum is fight or flight, right? Fight or flight is referred to as sympathetic, and rest and digest is referred to as parasympathetic. And so all of our healing objectives, when people come to you, Ravi, and when they come to me, they want better digestion, they want better sleep, they want better focus, they want more muscle growth, they want better creativity, they want to have better digestion, better intimacy, all better detoxification, better blood sugar, right? All of those things only occur in the body when we are in a parasympathetic state. Now, what happens is a lot of times people are stuck in a sympathetic dominant state, where our body goes from a state of rest, digest, repair, restore, reproduce, rejuvenate. And our nervous system and our entire body, therefore, goes into a state of fight or flight or freeze. So we go into survival states. And so, we want to kind of understand that we should be spending about 80% of our time in a parasympathetic repair state versus 80% of our time in a fight or flight state. So most people have their nervous systems kind of mismatched. And as a result of that, they never actually accomplish being healthy, because the state of your nervous system ultimately determines the function of your cells. When we're in fight or flight, different hormones are being released. When we're in rest and repair, different hormones, peptides, chemicals are being released. So the state that we're in has the greatest impact on our health. And so our goal is to get our clients into a more parasympathetic state. That's also where they burn fat as well, instead of burning glucose and glycogen for energy. And so the fastest way to do that is by using the breath. So a really clear example of when people are autonomically mismatched is if somebody eats a meal in a state of fight or flight. So think back to the last meal you had, Ravi, our listeners, think back to the last meal that you had. Were you consciously, slowly chewing that food, being present to it? Or For some people, it's just scarfing it down because they have 15 minutes and their meal is an inconvenience to them, but they know they need to eat something. So, our nervous system, if it's not in a state of rest and digest, but instead it's in a state of fight or flight, there's a significant decrease of blood flow and therefore oxygen and therefore function to these regions, right? So what happens when we're in fight or flight, our organs go into basically a suspended state of animation. So they get enough blood flow to survive and not become necrotic, but not enough blood flow to thrive. And so instead of the blood flow going to our organs, where it should be going in rest and digest states, it ends up going to our arms and legs because our nervous system is in a state of fight or flight. And so one of the fastest ways to shift that state for somebody is to be aware of what the activity is that they're trying to do, right? So if you're trying to rest and digest or eat a meal, then you want to shift your breath, perhaps doing something like box breathing for a couple of minutes, maybe even doing these lengthened exhales that we demoed. Something that slows down our breath, shifts us into that parasympathetic state, tells our body we're safe, tells our nervous system we're safe. It's okay to send blood flow to the gut because that's where we need it right now. And then intentionally chew your food, taste it, all that good stuff. And then it gives your body a much better chance to digest that meal. In fact, making stomach acid is an incredibly energy intensive process. Your stomach acid is 1,000,000 times more acidic than your blood. And because of that, it takes a huge, shift in your body's chemistry in order to produce stomach acid. And so your body can't be in fight or flight and be making stomach acid at the same time. Right? It just wouldn't. It doesn't have the resources or the capacity to do that. So these processes that are important for healing and repair shut down when we're in that state of fight or flight. Now, there are going to be times where it's important for us to be in a fight or flight physiology. Like if I'm exercising, right? If I'm going for a run, right? That's fight or flight physiology. I'm going to take shorter, shallower breaths because my lungs and my diaphragm are going to help me in pumping, in my heart and pumping the blood to my extremities. I want to shut down blood flow to my digestive organs because, digesting, what I ate a few hours ago isn't really going to be important for me right now. I need to mobilize the energy that I already have, right? So I'm going to increase glycogen secretion from the liver, not try to digest more food because that's not energy efficient for me to do that. I already have stores of energy that I can utilize. So our body goes into a state of, quote unquote, fight or flight. And we want that to happen, right? And we would adjust, again, we would adjust our breath accordingly, right? If you're going for a run, you're not going to take long, deep inhales and long exhales, right? That wouldn't be the right way to breathe. You would breathe in accordance to the activity that you're trying to do.
So yeah, so just the way to think about this is, back when we were hunter gatherers, we would encounter some danger, whether it be some like animal or predator or what have you, and you get into a high sympathetic activity, a sympathetic tone rather. That's where you need it, right? You need that cortisol surge, you need that increased activity, you need the blood to be shunted away from your digestive system because it doesn't make sense for your body to digest your food when you have an immediate threat right there. So that's where it makes sense to have higher sympathetic activity because you need your blood to be in your muscles. You need to breathe rapidly. You need to extract yourself from that situation versus the opposite where you're eating and you're digesting. You need to, turn that system off, that sympathetic system off and the parasympathetic on. And that's where we in general have an issue, I think, as a population as a whole, right? Because there's these constant low grade stressors that we all feel. Just as you mentioned, people try to eat quickly, like in 15 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever time they have. They don't think about the process of just relaxing and getting in the right state when they're eating. And that's incredibly important in such an, I know that, just growing up in an Indian family, my mother would tell me this. She was like, sit down, take some deep breaths. This is like part of our culture, right? Like, growing up and we forget this in our fast-paced society, but that's so important. And I just want to add, another interesting aspect to this is I run a lot of these GI map studies on people where you're looking at the microbiome, but you're also looking at the inflammatory markers and like the immune system function of their GI tract. And I will see a deficiency in IgA or maybe decreased enzymes. And I talk to the expert clinician that will review these with me, and they're often saying, "Hey, make sure the person's taking some deep breaths before they eat. It'll potentially help this." Obviously, if you rule out other issues that they have, but this is one of the things that helps. So it's like I see it on the studies, and then when people do focus on that, deep breaths, the being in the parasympathetic state, those markers improve. It's remarkable. So it makes so much sense.
Yeah, what's really fascinating is that when we're in fight or flight, our external defenses improve and our internal defenses degrade. So, our digestive, mucosa lining starts, degrading. Our immune system starts degrading because these are more internal defenses. Whereas right now, if the threat that's being perceived is external to us, then we're going to increase blood pressure. We're going to increase wound healing, platelet aggregation. Like these are the type of things that our body is shifting towards and preparing for. It's more prepared for a wound than it is a pathogen, right? So now when we see this shift and people being in this sympathetic dominant state, right, their internal environment becomes more prone to disease and infection and disruption because their body is so busy trying to prepare for an outside threat that doesn't actually exist.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's the concept of autonomic pairing, meaning that like if you're supposed to be in a rest and digest parasympathetic state, you put yourself in that state through breathing to assist with, whatever functions you need in that activity. Now, what if it's the opposite? What if you're in a situation like maybe you're competing in a sport, or you're going for a competitive run? You want to put yourself in a sympathetic state. How would you breathe to do that?
Yeah. So, generally speaking, if we're sprinting, then we're going to be breathing rapidly in and out through our mouth. And if we're going for a run, then we would either maintain nasal breathing in and out, or we would breathe in through our nose and out through our mouth. And so generally speaking, like as we go through different gears of breathing, the idea here is to breathe to your tolerance and to maintain, a breath that's comfortable for you. So it's going to be different for everyone depending on their level of, obviously their metabolic health. But I start off people by breathing in and out through their nose as much as they can. Once they can't do that anymore, then once we're not able to maintain nasal breathing, we've exceeded our metabolic limits. Okay. So now we're in a metabolic deficit where we're creating stress on our metabolic system. And that might not be a bad thing. Hormesis, like, kind of a controlled stressor is a good thing for us, but we've exceeded our metabolic limits. Next, we would breathe in through our nose, out through our mouth. That rapidly allows us to eliminate the CO2. And then as we go into perhaps higher states of performance, if you're doing a sprint, then we would want as much blood going to our arms and legs as possible. And the way we would do that is by rapidly inhaling and exhaling through our mouth. So we take people through different gears of breathing, just like in a car or a bike, and then they would gear down. So then they would, once you stop running, then you go in through the nose, out through the mouth, in through the nose, out through the mouth, and then you go down back to breathing in and out through the nose. And then you slow that breath down as much as you can in between your sets. So the key is building resilience. And the way to build resilience is the delta between peak stress levels and maximum relaxation. The resilience is basically the measurement of how long it takes you to get back to a baseline, right? And so if you understand how to breathe correctly, then you're going to get back to that baseline so much faster.
Now, is there a good breathing technique to prep yourself for an event? Say you woken up early and you're still kind of, groggy, and you're sitting in the car and you want to get ready and prep yourself for some athletic event. How would you do that in terms of breathing?
Yeah, so a couple of things come to mind. One is humming. So humming, believe it or not, relaxes you, and sometimes we need that focused, calm, but also alert relaxation that we can experience when we get our nervous system primed in the right state. So humming increases nitric oxide production. Nitric oxide production helps with dilating blood vessels and increasing blood flow. So humming your favorite song can be a great way. If you need energy, and you want to crank up your adrenaline, then there's something called bellows breath. And bellows breath is really simple. And essentially, we're breathing forcefully in through our nose and either out through our nose or out through our mouth. And the way we would do this is we just put our hands up like this. I would take a rapid inhale and then a rapid exhale, either through my nose or my mouth, as I bring my elbows forcefully down to the side. And it would look and sound like this. So if I did this 30 times, 3 rounds, then that's going to really get my blood pressure going. It's going to get my heart pumping. It's going to get my adrenaline pumping. We do caution people who have a history of high blood pressure just to be mindful with this one because it is going to like really get your blood pumping. And it's not recommended for people who don't have controlled blood pressure because it works so quickly and so rapidly. And
Right.
that's a great way to kind of get yourself amped up before you're going to do something.
That's what Tony Robbins does before his
Yep.
events. Yeah, I remember him sharing that when I was listening to one of his events. He was sharing this technique. It was the bellows breath.
Yep.
Then he bounces on a treadmill and a trampoline rather.
Yep.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. So that's called rebounding. And just for everyone's reference, rebounding is a mini trampoline that you jump up and down on because that helps with promoting lymphatic drainage.
Yes, excellent. Okay, so the next question I have for you, Sachin, and this is something that many of us struggle with, is sleep, right? And I mean, it's a complicated topic because there's so many aspects to proper sleep hygiene. But let's just, for the sake of this discussion, pretend that somebody is dialed in sleep hygiene. They're doing all the right things. And if those of you who are listening don't know what proper sleep hygiene is, I've done a couple podcasts on sleep, so just go back and listen to those because there's a lot of helpful information. But if we've done all the right things and we still cannot go to sleep, or we wake up in the middle of the night and we can't go back to sleep, what is the best type of breathing for that situation?
Yeah, great question. So again, it's all about nervous system, and we want to shift into a more parasympathetic state. So there's an exercise that I call the parachute exercise. So we can all probably think back to kindergarten or preschool when we would all kind of get around the parachute and we would wave it up and down, and then we throw it up in the air and then wait for it to gently and slowly come down. So essentially, you're visualizing that where you would take a nice breath in, and then you're slowly exhaling, pretending like your nostrils are the little hole in the middle of the parachute, letting that air out. And you're just melting into your bed with every exhale that you take, just like the parachute is melting into the ground. So that's the visual exercise I give people. And I don't really give them numbers because sometimes that stresses people out. You'll know what feels right. So we're just taking a nice deep breath in, and then we're just slowly letting it out. And we're not forcing the air out, we're just letting it out, right? We're just letting the parachute fall to the ground. We're not forcing it to the ground. And so if we start breathing in this pattern with that visual and just kind of melting a little bit into the bed with each exhale, I find that can be really helpful for people. Now, some people need numbers. So Andrew Weil actually developed a breathing technique, and I don't know how you give credit to people for these things because it's just numbers,
Yeah,
but I'll give him the credit. And so he recommends something called the 4-7-8 breath. And so the 4-7-8 breath is breathing in for 4 seconds, holding for 7 seconds, and then exhaling for 8 seconds. So you're getting at about a 4-second inhale and then about a 15-second exhale. And it doesn't have to be seconds, it could be a count, whatever feels comfortable for you. I think the key with breathing is you'll know when you're doing it right, and you'll also know when it's not right for you. So just feel into it and be a steward of your own breath, but use those as a guideline for either a visual exercise, or if you need numbers, then that could be the 4-7-8 breath could be a good technique.
excellent. And you mentioned several times, breathing out through your nose, and you also mentioned, at times you breathe out through your mouth. Breathing in, certainly, we discussed this in the last podcast. We're breathing in, certainly, there's a benefit of breathing in
Mm-hmm.
through your nose. What about breathing out? Does it really matter? Nose, mouth? How does that affect anything?
Yeah, great question. So generally, we want to preserve the oral microbiome. So if we're breathing even out through our mouth for extended periods of time, it's going to dry out our saliva. And usually, if we're breathing out through our mouth, then that's an indication to our nervous system that we're in some sort of sympathetic state. right? So generally speaking, I want people, the more relaxed and present, calm, and focused you want to be, the more you want to be breathing through your nose, right? So the more parasympathetic we want to be, the more we want to be breathing in and out through our nose, and the slower we want to be breathing. Now, the opposite of that, on the opposite end of that spectrum, it just becomes really easy to juxtaposition. If a lion was chasing you, I'd want you to be breathing in and out through your mouth as fast as you can,
Right.
right? Because that's the opposite end of the spectrum. So you just have to decide where in the spectrum you want to be. And generally speaking, I think of the breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth as like a recovery breath, right? So you're either ramping up to go into fight or flight, or you're ramping down from fight or flight. So it's more of a transitionary gear that that you'd want to be in if you needed.
Okay. Got it. Interesting. In the last podcast, we also briefly mentioned breathing through the left and right nostril and how
Mm-hmm.
that may offer sort of a different experience or what have you. And I know you're gonna have to edit this, editor. What's the name of that? It's Breathe by, what's the author's name?
A Breath by James Nestor.
Breath by James. Okay. So we can continue on. And also in the book Breath by James Nestor, he mentions breathing through the left and right nostril and how, that differs. So can you briefly discuss this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's really fascinating is we actually have erectile tissue in the inside of our nasal cavity, which sounds kind of weird because our nose actually very, histologically is very resemblant to our sexual organs. Strange, but true.
Yeah.
And so we have erectile tissue in our nostrils. And what you might find is that there's times of the day where it's easier to breathe out of one nostril versus the other. And what's happening is the nervous system is actually rebalancing and re-regulating itself because the nostril that we breathe from actually can activate either a sympathetic response or a parasympathetic response, or activate our left brain or activate our right brain. So the easiest way to remember this, Ravi, and to our listeners, is to just think of the accelerator and brakes on your car. Okay. So if your foot is on the brakes all the time, right, the brakes are on the left-hand side, that would be exclusively breathing through your left nostril. That would help you get into a more parasympathetic, relaxed state. The accelerator is on the right-hand side. So that's like breathing through your right nostril. And that's going to activate more of our sympathetic nervous system. And it's going to activate our left side of our brain, right? So our logical and creative side of our brains are going to, if we want to activate them, it'll depend on which nostril we want to breathe through. So to be balanced, you would do something called alternate nostril breathing, where you're breathing in and out through the left nostril and then in and out through the right nostril. And you would just use your thumb and your pinky finger to alternate between the two. And you do that for a few minutes, and that would give you a nice balance feeling. Now, if you wanted to be more relaxed, let's say, then you could, in fact, put a silicone plug up one of your nostrils and breathe only through your left nostril. If you wanted to be more sharp and alert and, more focused, and you need to get something done, right, and you need to be, really present and alert to it, then you could plug your left nostril and breathe just through your right nostril. So you can actually kind of manipulate your breath in order to decide how you want to feel from a brain activation standpoint and nervous system activation standpoint.
So, it sounds a little woo, right? Like, covering one nostril versus the other. And when I first heard it, I was like, oh, is this really true? Is this, is there any data or, is there any clinical relevance here? Is there anything supporting this type of breathing? I'm just curious. It's because I
Yeah,
haven't heard it prior to reading this book.
yeah, it'd be interesting to do like a functional MRI or a SPECT scan on somebody
Yeah.
going through breathing techniques. And in fact, I've actually discussed this with my mentor to do SPECT scans on people as they're utilizing different breathing modalities and techniques, just to see what changes are happening in the brain, because that would be proof positive, right?
Yeah.
Now, these techniques have been used for thousands of years. So that tells us something, right? That there's probably something there. And now we have the instruments to kind of measure these things, but we also have to have the financial instruments to kind of do these studies as well. Because I can't imagine who would profit off of the information, right?
Right.
So I'd have to look into it to see if any data exists, but it would be cool and very easy to measure, right?
Yeah.
Probably costs a couple $1,000s to do the study, but pretty easy to measure using a SPECT scan to see how blood flow changes in the brain based on the nostril that somebody's breathing out of. And
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
try it for yourself, right? That's the other thing. It's like you'll know in a couple of minutes if it's going to work or not. It's not going to take years to figure out if it's helping you or not helping you.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, hey, look, if it works, great. If it doesn't, no harm, no foul. Just
Right.
breathe, whatever, whichever way works for you. Well, Sachin, this was amazing. I appreciate your time here. Again, this was very enlightening and extremely helpful to our listener base. If anybody wants to learn more about breathing or contact you, how would they do so?
Now you've got me curious about alternate nostril breathing. So I've already started kind of researching to see what comes up. Yeah, thank you for asking, Ravi. So if people want more information, I've created a whole bunch of free tools and resources that dive a little bit deeper into each of the things that we talked about today. And it's all free. I have nothing to sell you because I believe that this is, for me, this is a passion project to share this with people. And so people can go to breathworkwithsachin.com. There they'll find keynotes. You can get the slides if you want of my presentation. I'm happy to share that with you. We have a breathe like this, not that guide. So it shows you different ways to breathe under different circumstances. We have a stop snoring guide. We have the parachute exercise. I share that in there as well. And actually, one other thing that's in there is a fully guided breathwork experience. So if you and your buddies want to get together, or if you're a clinician and you want to take your staff through it, or even your patients through it, just need a speaker or just headphones, play it. I'd guide you through the entire 90-minute process, and it's totally life-changing and transformational. So that's all in there for anyone who wants to get absolutely free access to it.
That's amazing. Thank you again for your time and energy. And I would love to have you back as many times as I can because this is such enlightening information.
Yeah, thank you. I believe it is as well. And it's really fascinating. The more, I'm just learning more and more and more. And here it is. So there's actually an article, if I may just stay here, EEG signature changed during unilateral yogi nasal breathing. So yogic practices suggest and scientific evidence demonstrates that right nostril breathing is involved with relatively higher sympathetic activity and arousal states, while left nostril breathing is associated with relatively more parasympathetic activity, stress alleviating state. So I'll drop this in the chat for you, Ravi. You can take a peek at it. And it's always nice to know these old yogis were right all along.
And did you do a chat GPT search?
No, I just went to PubMed.
PubMed. Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, PubMed, great resource. Especially, if you have any doubt of any of this stuff, I encourage you, as anything, like look it up. Don't trust us completely, because if you do and you have that lingering doubt, you're just not going to do it. So look it up. Go to ChatGPT. So it's free. It's so easy to use. Go to PubMed, also free. Look this stuff up. Make a decision for yourself. But it certainly can be life changing.
Yeah, and this was published in Nature, which is a very reputable source.
Excellent.
Cool. Thanks,
Thank
brother.
you, Sachin. Yeah, thank you.
All right, have a great one.
You too.